and gentlemen,
It's the body.
Today, my goal is to inform everyone here what we are trying to do as a leadership team to infuse the comprehensiveness of the gospel in our DNA, in this local body, in this church, what we're trying to do to make sure that we're making disciples who in turn make disciples, to make sure that there are many healthy gospel witnesses across the city. There will be three main views. Sounds cheesy, but a space shuttle universal view, a closer airplane, 30,000 feet look at what God has in store, and then we're going to get down to it. You saw the video, life groups. That'll be the practical rubber meets the road. How are we going to do this in this local context, and what does that mean for you? Okay, so space shuttle view, the universe's purpose and grand narrative is, what's the purpose of the universe? Someone say it. Jesus, yes, for His glory and His glory alone. So everything, literally everything, is for Him. Now that sounds a little selfish. First time I heard it, I was like, man, God is kind of arrogant, man. Like everything is about Him and for Him and His glory. Our flesh will immediately say, what's in it for me? Right? Now, it doesn't have to be for us because we are the what? Well, the potter, clay, right? We have no right to tell God, hey, I want to be made this way. Hey, I need to be this way. But in His brilliance, in His magnificent brilliance, God made it so that the way He designed things to be entails your joy, entails my joy. So it's a good thing that He's about Himself. It's good news because it's not in conflict with our joy and actually ensures our joy because everything being for God entails that. All joy is found in Him, Psalm 16:11. I'm sorry, I couldn't get the slides up. But if you need all of these verses, just email me, pv@thebodysd.com. And if you have any issues with this message, pv@thebodysd.com. Jason S@thebodysd.com. All right, Psalm 16:11. He made us to have and enjoy Him always. Isaiah 62, Zephaniah 3, Psalm 37, Philippians 4. As Piper puts it, He is most glorified when we are most satisfied in Him. So it's a good thing He's about Himself because He would be robbing us of joy if He wasn't. Does that make sense? Because if all joy, if all treasure is in Him and He doesn't give us Himself, He'd be a crummy God. He'd actually be jipping you off of the fullness of the joy that He made you to be. Okay. And the reason why, that's actually why we at the Body Church, we want to be what God is about because it's the only thing that's guaranteed not to fail. It's the only thing that's guaranteed to ensure that we become what the video said, just the apostles becoming apostles, the teachers teach, the encouragers encourage, the people with money make it rain. Okay? So, all right. Just in case. All right, so He's not glorified by people who hate Him. He's not glorified by these people who's like, all right, I'll go set up some chairs. Let me go, because Victor made me feel bad. We don't have that kind of God. Do you guys ever go on YouTube and see these YouTubeable dates? You know what I'm talking about? Like if someone has this awesome date, it typically goes on YouTube, and then if it gets a certain amount, they'll start interviewing the people. Like, hey, why did you do what you did? Why did you do that? Now, my friends, let's just say I took my wife on that kind of date. Put it in context, one of my friends recently rented a helicopter in Hawaii, and they spent some time on their own island in Hawaii. So let's just say that kind of date, okay? Y'all don't pay me, so I don't have the cash to do that. But let's just say had that kind of date, and they started asking, hey, AJ, why'd you do all that? Why would you spend that money, spend that time, spend the thought process for your wife to have that kind of experience? Like, that's, of course, making it kind of rhetorical because what they expect you to say is because, oh, man, how could I not love this wife? Man, she's pretty, she's hot, she's great, she's everything. Now, if my answer is anything but that, or anything that goes away from that, it's going to be a whole different thing. Especially if my answer is, because I had to, man. You know how it is. You know how women are, man. They see these YouTube things, and then, like, if you don't do that, then you got to. If my answer is anything like that, that's going viral for a completely different reason. It goes from, man, or it goes from, oh, look at that girl, look at that guy, to someone punched that dude in the face, and poor girl, man. I got a friend, So it becomes that kind of thing. In the same way, God is not glorified when you're begrudgingly, religiously just doing things because you have to, instead of realizing that you get to. All right, so what we do, actually, I promised Joelle that I'd get this topic in there, so I put it in there last night. All right, what we could do is even take something that's supposedly bad or has this bad connotation like sex, and make sure I'm in my notes on this one. Something that is supposedly bad, and see how God designed that for our enjoyment. Because I hear it all the time from the Christian circle, like sex. Ooh, man, we don't want to talk about sex. That's just temptation. No, it's not. God is not only pro-life; He's actually pro-sex. Check it. He designed it. All right. I got to make sure this is. I know. I'm like, oh, keep this one in the know. So, and from outside the Christian circles, sex is typically seen as, oh, these Christians, they can't have that, because their God is a cosmic killjoy. Sex to them is a no-no. It's weird to me, man. Like don't have sex. We tell our kids, don't have sex, don't have sex, don't have sex. You're married, have a bunch of it. But you said it was bad. So what we don't realize is that sex actually, God designed this to be a beautiful thing. It has much more significance than we could ever think of and what we could plan. Okay, but us being humans, we take something like that, something beautiful, and just mess it up, man. It's in our DNA. We have a sinful DNA, and that's why we're trying to infuse the gospel in this DNA to address that. But we do what we think is right. God explicitly says, I've designed things to be this way, and we end up saying, I think you might be wrong. Scientifically, I think, God, you might be wrong. I'm going to do it this way, because if I do it that way, it robs me of my joy, and I think I have more fun this way. So that's what we as humans tend to do, and because we say, God is only there to rob me of my joy, not realizing that He designed things for your joy, and we start saying things, us being the sinful little humans that we are, say things like, my way is better than God's way. Okay? So our way of doing church is better than God's way. And today we're going to get to address that. And what was my transition on that? So just want to let everyone know, God is not here to try to rob you of your joy. He's actually saving you from yourself. Okay? He's saving you from us, who's not omniscient, who's not omnipotent, who's not omnibenevolent, and who refuses to listen to the one who is. And because of it, we mess things up. The biggest enemy of our joy is us. The biggest enemy of our joy is us. We are the biggest killjoy. And here's another thing I promised it would be in this sermon from yesterday. We do what we want. We do what we say. Forget God. And then we say, what happened? You happened. Huh? I got it in. Yeah. All right, 2 things. It's in there. Boom. Okay? And it's not just sex that we mess up, it's everything else. Church, we mess up. The way we love our wives, we mess things up. God says how we love our wives. Jesus Christ portrayed how we're supposed to love our wives. And we say, nah, I think I got something better. Okay? And let me say this too. We typically go to science because science is today's Tower of Babel. It's like man's accomplishments. Let me say this. Science is not against God. All we're doing with science is discovering how God designed things magnificently. Just learned that one of our colleague's church partner. I mean, his cousin set him up on a drug deal that killed him. You know what I mean? The reason we're so passionate about making sure that we do what we do is because there's so many people getting spiritually slaughtered, and in doing so, slaughter people. That's all that is, and it just broke our heart yesterday. All right. So anyway, so this is what we're going to talk about. How has God designed things to be? Church designed His people to be so that He is most glorified and that we're most satisfied in Him as we mature as disciples. All right. So the three topics that we're going to mainly go through are not simply God's suggestions. They're not merely, hey, it'd be a good idea, AJ, if you did this. No, it's explicit commands. So since it's an explicit command, very clearly commanded by God, this is only going to work out for our joy and His glory. The first view was the universal view, and we just went through that. God is for God, and it's awesome that He is for God because that entails our joy. The three things are the pursuit of God, community or family. They're interchangeable for this sermon. And God's purposes, namely His mission. And then we'll go through the ground level car view, rubber meets the road. The practical look at the way we're going to pursue all of this is mainly through our life groups. You heard it through the video, you heard it announced. Get in our life groups. Later on today, I'd like for everyone to go in the back table and just give them your number so that on the week that we launch, we'll email you the address. Okay, we have 5 right now, and they are strategically placed around San Diego on different days, Tuesday, Wednesdays, Thursdays. If you want one on Saturday, request it. We'll get that so that you have no excuse. Okay, what are life groups? The life group is where together as a family, living about our Father's business, we are being transformed from one glory to another by God and His gospel. Okay, all that as we live out lives of true disciples who embody the gospel, all for the fame of His name. It's imperative that we understand what life means in life group. We don't just say name things just because it sounds catchy. No, life in life group is a biblical Christian life, a true disciple who is being a disciple, a duck that's quacking, not a duck that's barking, if that makes sense. Didn't make sense to me just now, so it might not make sense to you. All right. So at the body, we recognize that our goal as the elders in training, as the leadership core, is to allow everyone to be able to live this Christian life well. Ephesians 4, 1 Corinthians 12, 1 Peter 4, to name a few. And not just one or two aspects of it, but everything. Because if you're a 2/3 Christian, you're jipping yourself off. And that's the thing that we don't want. Now, on a side note, this is a way and not the way, meaning this is the way for us, but if you're coming from a different church or you go to a different church and it's not the way that they're doing it, hey, that's the way they feel led to do it, it's okay. But we're just saying that here at the Body Church, this is the way that we're going to pursue God and His glory, to pursue maturing disciples. One of the purposes of life groups is to have a place to learn and train yourself in godliness, 1 Timothy 4:7. So it's not just about reading the playbook. It's not just reading the manuscript and reading the Bible with no intention of actually applying that in our lives. Okay? Super Bowl's coming up. I promise you, their intention of reading that playbook is so that they could do what is in that playbook. It's not to be like, wow, man, that'll look good on Tecmo Bowl or something like that. Shows you that I haven't played PS. I don't even know what the things are. Anyway, so the purpose is to encourage, to exhort, and urge one another to stop watching it from the game and just being a referee saying that, throwing flags out there like, oh, church shouldn't be that way. Oh, could have been better this way. No, the goal is to be in these groups and just work that stuff out. It's like, oh, okay, you think that it should be better this way? Seems like God put it on your heart. You might want to try it out. Let's try that. So it's going to train us in godliness. If someone's scared to share their faith, it's not actually courage is not the issue, because you guys go to Six Flags. Courage is not the issue. It's just shame. It's a skewed view of the gospel. Your identity is in something else. Typically, that's why you're not out on mission. So we get to work all of that stuff out. The goal is not to have another Bible study, although we are going to dig deep into the Bible study. Okay, it's not a Bible study where you learn truths that you have no intention to apply. It's not one of those. It's not another like mercy ministry where you just do mercy ministry for ministry purposes, but you have no idea why you're even doing that. So our goal is not to have multiple of these things and not understand that that there's so much more. Our goal is not to be, okay, I see a bunch of little caricatures here. Our goal is not to be like that, where, well, those are pretty good, but a caricature is like those things on the beach in Seaport Village where, like, they'll draw you and, I'd have chinky eyes, flat nose, you know what I mean? Like, our goal is not to be one of those caricatures. Like, as a church, we don't want to be like this big old head, but our heart is like tiny, and we are like little people hands, you know what I'm saying? Like little baby hands. Or we don't want to be like, oh, worship Jesus, yeah. Have a big heart, have a huge affection for God, but have a little tiny head and no hands. Or a lot, a big, you get what I'm saying. We want to look not funny. Now, are we saying we shouldn't have Bible studies or mercy ministries or outreaches? No, we're saying that we need more of all of that, more of all of the time. So we're trying to structure things in a way, we're trying to, I know, am I moving too fast? Okay, we're trying to structure things in a way that, that ensures that we position ourselves under the waterfall of grace through these life groups, through these events that we're going to do, so that they all work out to address all these things. To address, are you growing in your knowledge and affection of God? Are you growing in your knowledge and affection of the family God saved you in? Are you growing in knowledge and affection of the people that He's, of the non-believers that He's surrounded you with which you're held accountable for? So these are the things that we're trying to do. Okay. One of the best ways to know what a church is about is what they pray about consistently. And now we're just going to simply go through common prayers, daily prayers that we'll have for each one of these life groups. One of our prayers is to have gospel-forged lives driven by and driven to God, that is, lives being transformed by God and His gospel through authentic relationships so that they are healthy gospel witnesses throughout the dark and broken places of the city. Sound familiar, right? It's our mission statement here at the body. How do we do this? By having three things: gospel-forged communities, gospel-infused families, I'll put it that way. Being transformed by the gospel, and for that gospel that has transformed you to compel you out into gospel-driven missions. Our prayers are, and just like a DNA, this is going to be a little redundant because DNA is pretty important if you know how DNA works. And if something's broken in the DNA, that's actually cancer. So we want to emphasize certain things. So, three main prayers. For God to allow each life group to be in relentless pursuit of God and His glory by pursuing to have an ever-deepening knowledge and understanding and an ever-deepening affection of Him and for Him. 2, for God to allow each life group to be in relentless pursuit of God and His glory in and through their intentionally gospel-driven mission. That means you're creating relationships, you're creating strategies to go out into the dark and broken places of the city. Hey, if you breed, like B-Land was saying, hey, you know what? As far as we breed dogs, we should do something around that. So you're being missional, doing the things that you would have done anyway, except you have gospel intentionality. Does that make sense? So Will coaches, Stephen coaches football. Guess what? God just gave us a layup because we now have a bridge to get all these people. I mean, not get them, but to influence them. Does that make sense? Okay. Third, for God to allow each life group to be in relentless pursuit of Him and His glory in and through their intentional, gospel-infused families. Meaning, you're going to work on getting to know your brothers and sisters in the faith. Because if they're not being who God desires them to be, you can't be who God desires you to be. Like I said, these are redundant for a reason. Because we want to emphasize that the pursuit of God, His glory, and His gospel is the purpose and the foundation. We don't just want community or family. We want a gospel-forged, gospel-infused family. We don't just want to do missions. We want that mission to be gospel-compelled, that the gospel propelled us to go to missions. Because the roots and intentions, the motivations are critical because it could be the difference, hear me, it could be the difference between soul-depriving things or soul-satisfaction. Soul-satisfying things. So our intent is important. All right, back to the first thing. The pursuit of God. We are to have an ever-deepening knowledge and understanding and affection of Him. Because Jesus said, when asked what the greatest commandment was, we are to love our God with all of our hearts, with all of our souls, with all of our might. Deuteronomy 6, Luke 10, Mark 12, Matthew 22. Because if we get the pursuit of God right, more than likely everything else will fall into place. Harmony, because there's a standard by which they go about. So this is the same way we're trying to line ourselves up, 2 Corinthians 3:18, just beholding Christ, pursuing Him, and letting things fall where they may. Because your theology is important. Your theology will inform how you love people. Your theology will inform how you do ministry. Your theology will inform how or why you even do missions. And as instruments in the Redeemer's hands, we want to be in tune with Him so that we can be used by the divine orchestrator as He lays out the best track ever, namely His grand narrative, the gospel being all nations. Anyway, His grand narrative. We want to be a family being about the Father's business or a community on mission. But our ultimate goal is not and never will be just community. Our goal will never just be missions. Our goal is God. Okay? Because from it, technically, if you logically think about it, once we have God, one of His biggest MOs is for you to be a family and for you to be out on mission. So that'll naturally come. So that's why we emphasize the Bible here. By beholding Him, we're transformed. Everything else is secondary. But we also must be growing in our affections for Him. Otherwise, we'll be doing things begrudgingly. And as we already discussed, doing things begrudgingly does not bring God fame. And affections will grow when we really get to know God and His truths, John 5:39. The Holy Spirit will use these truths, these meat and potato truths, to transform people. Let's go back to that YouTube sensation example. Let's just say they ask, okay, so what do you love about your wife, AJ? And then I say, I got this one. I won't mess this one up, for sure. The reason I love my wife is because she gave this 5-foot-tall Asian a chance, right? This 6-foot blonde hair, man, her blonde hair glistening in the sun, reminding me of how bright her personality is and our bright future because of her beauty is just so transformative in and of itself. And her blue eyes, man, don't get me started with her blue eyes. Her blue eyes melts me every time she looks at me because it reminds me of Zechariah 2:8. Man, I'm God. I'm the apple of His eye, and even though I have all these massive imperfections, my wife, with her blue eyes, sees me, sees past all that, and loves me regardless, the gospel, right? Like, ooh, man, this guy, it's good. It's good stuff, right? It is good until you hear someone in the background say, uh-oh, you done did it again, man. If someone in the background says, okay, hey, his wife is pretty, but she's actually shorter than him. She does have beautiful Revlon hair, right? But it's not blonde. right? Exactly. Oh, no, right? And her eyes, they are beautiful, but they're gray. They actually change colors, depending on her mood. Right? So even though I had all this great intentions of glorifying my wife or bringing her much glory, and I was even, some of those things were even true, the purposes of it, and I was so passionate about it. Since I didn't know my wife accurately, it didn't bring her any glory whatsoever. Same thing with God. Okay, we want you to know with accuracy the grandeur of this God who we get to know, who we get to love, who we get to serve. And that's why in Nehemiah 1 through 3, they were getting it in, man, from early morning to midday. And then after that, they broke off into small groups. Because knowing God for who and what He is that important. And also want to point out in verse 1, it says that the Lord commanded Israel. See how God is, man? He loves Israel so much that He wanted Israel, us, to go to His Word so that we could know with accuracy our God and how He wired things to be for our joy. And we're not going to read it right now, but Nehemiah 2 through 8, this is when they, Hezekiah, all those names, this is when they broke off into those groups. This is similar to what we see in Acts 2, 42 to 47, where the people devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship. So they pursued God through His Word. Basically, it's Jesus and His teachings, which, by the way, Jesus pointed to the Old Testament, the book of the law of Moses, which all essentially pointed to who? Back to Himself. Okay, so the second thing, so we're going to mimic what they did in Acts 2, what they did in Nehemiah 8, and the second thing we're going to do is we're going to be in community, the family that God saved us. So here we see Nehemiah, as well as the book of Acts. After the pastor expounded on the meat and potatoes, life-giving word of God, they broke off into smaller groups to kind of savor that word, to digest it, to chew it up, see what it looks like in their lives and in the context of their lives. What does this law mean for my life? What does this thing that Jesus said, why does He say, imitate me this way, da-da-da? What does that look like for you in your life? This is what we're going to be doing in our life groups, is contextualizing what was preached on Sunday to your specific group so that we as a church get to grow together in that way. We have that opportunity. Another prayer is for these for these life groups to have gospel-forged communities pursuing God and His glory intentionally as a family. We don't. There's no Lone Ranger Christian. Trust me, you're not that cool. You're not like. You might think you have a spiritual cape and that, man, I could handle this. Nope, you're not that grand. Okay, it's important. I want you guys to consider this. Jesus Himself. Jesus Himself lost perfect community with the Trinity so that He could save us into a family. So Jesus died for you to have the ability to be in this family. And He didn't do that happenstance. He didn't do that by accident. There was a purpose for that. So with all that we have, with all of our resources, we're going to pursue community, because community is not some spiritual accessory as a decoration. It's actually a spiritual necessity for your spiritual formation. It's not something that God just says, hey, maybe this will be a good idea. There's 107 verses in the New Testament alone in terms of the one anotherings. Do you think God put that in there accidentally? Or do you think there's a pretty big purpose for that? There's a big purpose for that, so that's why we're going to pursue that. God has designed things to be completely dependent on Him as we rely on one another. In Acts 2:42, the word fellowship, Greek word koinonia, has the meaning of a couple of things. Koinonia means fellowship, partnership, participation, sharing, and contribution. And we see this in a lot of text. Romans 15, 1 Corinthians 1, all of that. And like I said, you could email me, aj@thebodysd.com. So we don't create community because God has already done that through the gospel. So our goal is not to create community, it's just to live in line with what God has already saved us to be. And 1 Corinthians 12, Romans 12, Ephesians 4, since church, our family, is something that you are and not something that you do, it's impossible to simply just have church. It's relationship-based instead of action-based. It's really key. It's an adjective instead of a verb. So, although the actions will be informed by the fact that will naturally overflow from the authentic relationships that we devote ourselves to. So let's clarify what biblical fellowship is. How are we doing on time? Okay. We are not even halfway through. So we're gonna have a second series on this sermon. I just shot called, I guess. Okay. And we'll stop after the third one. So, let's clarify what biblical fellowship is. What are the ingredients of true biblical fellowship? One is to pursue and seek God in His renown, His glory, while two, pursuing Him in His renown through relationships, particularly and especially the Christians that He saved you within. So the first ingredient, the first one is pursuing God, because it would be impossible to have true biblical fellowship and community without having true fellowship and community with God. 1 John 1, 3, and 1 John 1, 6 through 7. And as mentioned earlier, our main goal is to have more of God, and from it will come community. It'll naturally overflow. Our leaders prayerfully consider how God can use them to spur His people to commune with Him through His Word, through prayer, through quality time, because non-believers will essentially experience Christ through our communities. And if we're not in communion with God or don't know God, we can't properly reflect God and properly talk about this God that we love so much. You cannot glorify God unless you know that He's glorious and worthy of that worship and praise. You can't be passionate about God if He's just some heavenly Santa Claus. Just like how the whole YouTube thing with my wife, I can't glorify her if I don't know that she doesn't have blue eyes and blonde hair. You have to properly know Him. Okay? As Matt Chandler put it, but if He's the God who does what He pleases, Psalm 115, if He's the maker, the sustainer of all things, where God is not exalted as author, creator, sustainer, and an all-omnipotent sovereign God, and then worship suffers, and where worship suffers, then every other relationship will suffer. So we want to dig deep into the Bible. Let's just take that out. So the context that God has us to flourish in is through community, because let's just say baking cookies, for example. Now, pursuing God, let's say by yourself through His Word, it has tons of value, right? And it'll do a lot. It'll actually be, in cookie terms, it'll taste good. Cookie dough tastes good. But the context by which that cookie dough becomes what it's made to be is in a what? It's in an oven of some sort. So that's how I want us to see community. This isn't taking out, the emphasis on God and His Word. It's just the context by which that Word transforms us. And second ingredient is relationships that He has given us. Biblical fellowship is intentionally placing God at the core of every relationship and having a purposeful time together where God is decisively, actively, intently exalted, or people are built up in Christ. Okay, so You heard a lot of intentionality, decisively, actively, intently. If I watched the Kansas City game with Victor, where the Chargers won, and that was all we did, that's not biblical fellowship. You hanging out in a mall is not biblical fellowship. You hanging out in a mall and say, oh, how's your community? Great. And then, oh, how's this dress? And then that's it. That's not biblical community. Keeping in mind how the Greek word for fellowship, koinonia, in Acts 2, and keeping in mind how every single time that Greek word was used, had some kind of spiritual connotation, let's just go through what each one of them meant. So first, it meant fellowship. So that means the intimate sharing of lives. For example, even ministry of presence. You being here on Sunday mornings has spiritual connotation to it. It creates a vibe. It creates an atmosphere so that more people can worship. Koinonia can also mean partnership. Okay, with obeying, for example, obeying and fulfilling God's revealed will for your life. Participation, for example, participation with God in what He is doing in the people's lives here at the Body Church or outside. Sharing, it can mean sharing, using people's giftings or how God has wired you to be and using that gifting. Last one, contribution. Contributing to everyone's ministry efforts. Simply hanging out, and not having all of those aspects of it is not biblical fellowship. And don't fool yourself by thinking that you're checking that off just because you're hanging out a lot. We desire for our communities to be a place where relationships can deepen and cultivate in such a way that the natural overflow is the flourishing of discipleship. Like godliness, this is not just going to come by accident. You don't become godly by just sitting on the couch and saying, God, do work in me. You don't become godly in that way. And in the same way with community, man, it needs to be prioritized. You know, it says in Acts 2, they devoted themselves to these things, to learning about God and learning about community. So this takes devotion. And you know what? It gets messy, but it's a beautiful mess. Coming from experience, I'll leave it at that. It's a beautiful, beautiful mess. We as Christians also have an advantage. And the reason why it's a beautiful mess, we have an advantage that no other communities have. We're the only community that can have real authenticity that could lead to transformation because we have the Holy Spirit in us and working through us, and the gospel is our foundation. We all have sinned, are imperfect beings, utterly unable to be reconciled to God, but because of Jesus Christ's life, death, and resurrection, we have been graciously reconciled to God forever. That is our foundation. That's the gospel. The basis of Christian family, basis of Christian community, and we respond accordingly. Someone in the car yesterday was saying, man, it felt so good being able to confess my sins and knowing that my brothers and sisters kind of can't judge me because they're all in the same boat. We're all sinners being saved by grace. We're all sinners imperfectly trying to run to God. We're all sinners being sanctified by God. And since that's the basis of our community, it allows people to be authentic. Because look, being 90% known is not to be known. If you think that you being 90% known is enough, you just gypped yourself off because you no longer... a doctor, unless he knows the accurate cure, unless you're being truthful with him, he can't diagnose it properly. And unless the doctors diagnose things properly, he can't give you the proper cure. So unless you're being 100, it's not going to happen for you in terms of spiritual growth. So don't think that, oh gosh, I'm not getting enough from this church. Well, who knows you? Nobody? Well, then how could you expect to grow in your spiritual growth? How do you expect to grow as a maturing disciple of Jesus Christ if you're not doing what He set things up to be? So it takes devotion. And, man, I think it's enough to stop right here. We're going to do, I'd rather have us spend a lot of time in meditating on what Christ did with communion. I'd rather have us, because that's what it's about, amen? Okay? So, but I do want you to think through your next steps. I've been praying that the Holy Spirit just kind of speak to each one of you to let you know what that next step is. And look, this next step doesn't mean that you're going to a seminary. You know what I mean? This next step doesn't mean that you're now going to spend 20 hours every day with each person here because you're supposed to be in community. You know what I mean? Like for some of you, you're not even a Christian. For some of you, you don't even know Christ. So your next step could be coming back tomorrow. Your next step could be going to Victor and asking him, hey, this Jesus Christ guy, is he real? Why is he real? Tell me about him. Your next step could be going to a life group. Or if you're in a life group, your next step might be getting over yourself and actually being open. Get known 100%. So I don't know what that next step is for you, but I pray that we pray that whatever that is, don't be disobedient, man. Don't quench the Spirit, because all God is trying to do, like Nehemiah 8:1, is trying to line you up into what He's already designed things to be for your joy and His glory.